Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, everyone. Today, we turn our attention to one of the most celebrated lyric poems of the Romantic era, Lord Byron's She Walks in Beauty. I call this lecture Ethereal Harmony: Beauty, Virtue, and Romantic Ideals in Byron's She Walks in Beauty. Written in 1814, this poem has endured for over 2 centuries as a quintessential expression of aesthetic admiration, balance, and romantic idealization. While She Walks in Beauty has been widely appreciated for its delicate interplay between light and dark, its fluid musicality, and its serene reverence for beauty, it has also been the subject of critical debate. Some scholars praise Byron's ability to immortalize a fleeting moment of admiration, while others argue that the poem reinforces restrictive gender roles, idealizing women as passive symbols of beauty rather than independent individuals. The lasting influence of this poem is evident in its continued presence in popular culture, most notably in the 1989 film Dead Poets Society. In one of the film's most memorable scenes, the students at Walton Academy recite She Walks in Beauty as part of their exploration of romantic poetry, reinforcing the poem's significance as a work that captures the wonder and reverence that poetry can inspire. The film itself serves as a broader meditation on individuality, passion, and the transformative power of literature, themes that are central to Byron's romantic vision. According to Andrew Elfenbein in Byron and Romantic Heroism, Byron was inspired to write She Walks in Beauty after attending a social event on June 11th, 1814, where he saw Lady Anne Wilmot Horton, his cousin's wife. Lady Anne was wearing a black mourning dress adorned with sequins, which created a striking effect, dark fabric shimmering under the candlelight. This moment of visual contrast, light reflecting off the darkness of mourning attire, may have influenced Byron's use of light and dark imagery in the poem. The opening lines encapsulate this effect. In lines 1 through 2, she walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies. Elfenbein argues that this imagery suggests more than just admiration for a woman's appearance. It reflects Byron's fascination with balance, harmony, and the coexistence of opposing forces. Unlike many of Byron's poems, which are charged with erotic passion, this poem is almost reverential, celebrating an ideal rather than pursuing desire. But now, let's break down each stanza, paying particular attention to Byron's use of contrast, balance, and other romantic themes. Stanza 1, we see a union of opposites. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. Byron's opening simile is unconventional. Rather than comparing the woman to the daylight, the sun, or brightness, he compares her to the night, a peaceful, cloudless night filled with starlight. According to Jerome McGann in his Fiery Dust: Byron's Poetic Development, Byron's emphasis on cloudless climes reinforces a sense of perfection and purity, removing any suggestion of disorder or storm. Instead, light and dark exist in harmony. The woman's beauty is not blinding or overwhelming, but mellowed to that tender light. The final line of the stanza reinforces Byron's preference for subtle, effortless beauty over artificiality. The gaudy day, with its excessive brightness, represents overdone artificial displays of beauty, while her beauty is as gentle and natural as twilight. In stanza 2, we see the precision of perfection. One shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace, which waves in every raven tress, or softly lightens o'er her face, where thoughts serenely sweet express how pure, how dear their dwelling place. Here, Byron perfects the concept of balance. He suggests that even the slightest deviation, one shade more, one ray less, would disrupt her beauty. According to Anne Milor in Romanticism and Gender, this idea reinforces traditional notions of female beauty. Women are seen as perfect only when they maintain a delicate, passive, and harmonious balance. However, Byron transcends mere physical admiration. Her beauty is not just about appearance, but also about her inner virtue. The phrase, quote, thoughts serenely sweet express, suggests that her mind, her purity, and her morality contribute to her beauty. In stanza 3, we see beauty as an expression of goodness. And on that cheek and o'er that brow, so soft, so calm, yet eloquent, the smiles that win, the tints that glow, but tell of days in goodness spent, a mind at peace with all below, a heart whose love is innocent. Byron ends with a moral and spiritual dimension to beauty. Her smiles and glow are not merely physical features, but reflections of a virtuous life. According to Peter Manning in his Romanticism and Apocalypse, this reinforces the romantic belief in the connection between external beauty and moral goodness. Byron is not just admiring her face, but what it represents: peace, kindness, and inner purity. While She Walks in Beauty is widely praised for its lyricism, balance, and romantic idealization of beauty, critics have long debated the implications of Byron's portrayal of women. Some argue that the poem elevates and immortalizes beauty as an aesthetic principle, while others suggest that it reinforces restrictive 19th century gender norms, portraying women as passive, silent figures whose primary virtue is their purity. Hereon, we'll focus on two key critical perspectives: Jerome McGann's argument that the woman in the poem is an untouchable ideal, a symbol rather than a real individual. And we'll also look at Anne Milor's feminist critique, which argues that the poem perpetuates traditional gender roles by portraying women as passive and morally pure. First, let's look at Jerome McGann, the woman as an untouchable ideal. According to Jerome McGann, in his book Fiery Dust: Byron's Poetic Development, 1968, Byron constructs a vision of beauty that is distant, mythic, and fundamentally unattainable. The woman in She Walks in Beauty is not portrayed as a real complex person with emotions or agency, but rather as a flawless aesthetic object, an embodiment of balance, symmetry, and light. McGann points out that Byron's focus is entirely on the woman's appearance and demeanor, rather than her thoughts, actions, or personality. Consider the lines, "She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies." McGann argues that by comparing the woman to an element of nature, the night, Byron distances her from humanity. The night sky is beautiful, but it is also untouchable, remote, and silent. This suggests that her beauty is admired from afar, rather than engaged with on a personal level. Similarly, Byron insists on her perfection, suggesting that even the smallest deviation, one shade more, one ray less, would diminish her beauty. One shade more, one shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace. This emphasis on flawless proportions reinforces McGann's point that Byron is not describing a real woman, but an aestheticized, perfected image of one. Her beauty is so delicate, so precise that it exists beyond human reach. McGann concludes that She Walks in Beauty exemplifies Byron's tendency to construct untouchable ideals of beauty, placing women on pedestals rather than portraying them as active, thinking individuals. This aligns with romantic aesthetic traditions where beauty is often presented as ethereal, elusive, and symbolic of deeper philosophical truths rather than something grounded in reality. Conversely, Anne Milor, in her Romanticism and Gender, takes a feminist perspective, arguing that She Walks in Beauty reflects restrictive 19th century gender norms. Byron's depiction of the woman as passive, serene, and innocent aligns with the period's expectations for female virtue. According to Milor, the woman's beauty is not only a physical attribute, but also a moral one. Her goodness is inseparable from her appearance, reinforcing the Romantic era belief that a woman's virtue is reflected in her face and demeanor. We see this in the final lines, "a mind at peace with all below, a heart whose love is innocent." Milor argues that this portrayal reduces the woman to an archetype rather than an individual. She's a figure of purity, calmness, and passivity rather than someone with independent thought or agency. Additionally, Milor notes that Byron's focus on light and darkness serves a dual function. While it emphasizes balance and harmony, it also reinforces the idea that women are meant to be pure, soft, and delicate. The phrase, "where thoughts serenely sweet express, how pure, how dear their dwelling place," suggests that the ideal woman is serene, gentle, and non-disruptive. She does not speak, act, or challenge, but instead expresses virtue through stillness and purity. Milor argues that this vision of beauty mirrors 19th century ideals of femininity, where women were expected to embody peace and moral perfection while remaining in a passive decorative role. So, how do we reconcile these two perspectives? On one hand, McGann helps us see how Byron's vision of beauty is deeply romantic, emphasizing symmetry, balance, and harmony rather than individual personality. His poem is not about a specific woman, but about an aesthetic ideal, a timeless representation of beauty, much like a piece of art or a landscape painting. On the other hand, Milor reminds us that idealization can also be a form of restriction. By making beauty synonymous with purity, serenity, and moral goodness, Byron's poem reinforces traditional gender norms that limit women to roles of passive admiration rather than active participation. However, it is also important to consider the cultural and literary context of the time. Romantic poets frequently celebrated beauty as an expression of the sublime, linking it to high nature and higher ideals. Byron's admiration may not necessarily be a deliberate attempt to suppress female agency, but rather a reflection of the period's fascination with aesthetic perfection and the balance of opposites. Ultimately, She Walks in Beauty remains a poem of extraordinary lyricism and power. Whether we see it as a celebration of harmony or a reinforcement of restrictive ideals depends on how we engage with its imagery and themes. Here are some questions for you to think about. Do you think Byron's portrayal of the woman is an act of admiration, or does it objectify her? Does the poem reinforce restrictive gender roles, or is it simply a romantic appreciation of beauty? How does Byron's use of celestial imagery influence our perception of the woman? Does it elevate her, or does it distance her from reality? And can idealization be both a form of admiration and a form of control? How do we distinguish between the two? By examining these critical perspectives, we gain a richer, more nuanced appreciation of She Walks in Beauty, one that acknowledges both its lyrical brilliance and its ideological implications. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your seminar discussion.